Good morning. I'm Charles Chrestman. I want to welcome you to Bible study this Sunday morning. We're going to be moving into a new quarter today that will move us from the book of Romans into a study of Proverbs and the Song of Songs. As in the past, if you've got a Bible or a personal study guide, it might be nice to have those handy as we take a look at the focal passages. I hope you and yours are doing well in these unusual times. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, please let me know. If you're ready, we'll get started. The title of today's lesson, Charted Waters. Our lesson today is the first in the 2020 Summer Quarterly, and it carries us back to the Old Testament for some ancient wisdom from the book of Proverbs that is intended to help us become a little sharper for living life well. The theme for the book is stated this way: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. This means that wisdom has a starting point, and it begins with a personal relationship with our Creator. The Proverbs in this book are more than mere common sense or good advice. They are sayings of the wise that teach us the connection between our deeds and our destiny. They also teach us how to create a peaceful and prosperous community under our Creator, the source of true wisdom. No isolated proverb can be taken as expressing the whole truth. It must be nuanced in the broader context of the whole book. Mastering the Proverbs requires weaving a garment of wisdom from the whole collection. Some say gaining wisdom from Proverbs takes a lifelong study. Now, as we think about the book of Proverbs, I want you to keep in mind that it contains 7 collections. Collection 1, which is the early part of the book, contains extended lectures to prepare one's heart for the pithy sayings in the collection that follows. Collection 2, starting in chapter 10, are simply the Proverbs of Solomon. Collection 3, that starts in chapter 22, covers the words of the wise that were probably adopted and adapted by Solomon. Collection 4 starts in Proverbs chapter 24 and extends that with additional sayings of the wise. Collection 5 takes a little twist. It starts in chapter 25 and covers the other proverbs that official from King Hezekiah's day copied after combing through the ancient records of Solomon's time. As you will recall, Hezekiah reigned about 300 years after Solomon. Collection 6 and Collection 7 are kind of interesting. They are attributed to Agur and Lemuel, respectively, about whom little else is known. The final result is a single work of sayings, advice, instructions, and warnings, structured as a manual for young people beginning their working lives, challenging them to seek the wisdom of the Lord. Now, practice many workplace Christians might find helpful as we study the book of Proverbs is to read 1 chapter a day, corresponding to the day of the month. You might say, well, why? Well, Proverbs has 31 chapters, and most months have 31 days. Anyway, just a thought. Regardless of how one studies Proverbs, it's an interesting undertaking. So if you're ready, let's get started. As I mentioned earlier, our lesson today is entitled Charted Waters. As we get started, I ask you to note that the first 7 verses of Proverbs really set forth the purpose and the theme of the book. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7 gives us a starting point as we dive into this fascinating book. If you would, follow along as we read our first focal passage. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. We see in this verse that wisdom has a starting point, and it begins with a relationship with the Lord. While Solomon used the word fear, what he really meant is that we should have a great deal of respect for our Creator. In short, he was saying we should take our walk with the Lord seriously. A sincere walk with the Lord allows our love for Him to be demonstrated in our respect for Him. By contrast, fools have no use for God. They turn their backs on His discipline and they oftentimes make foolish decisions. That kind of gets us to our second focal passage of the day, taken from verses 8 and 9, where Solomon wrote, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and don't reject your mother's teaching, for they will be a garland of favor on your head and pendants around your neck." Excuse me. As we move on to verses 8 and 9, we see Solomon beginning to instruct his son. His instruction could have been used for any young man of his time on the road to adulthood. By encouraging his son to listen, Solomon pointed to an important discipline for growing in God's wisdom. Listening means more than hearing. To listen means to pay attention, absorb, interpret, and apply what is being said. Notice Solomon urged his son to listen to his instruction. In verse 9, having pointed to the need to take God's wisdom seriously, Solomon focused on the reward that awaited God's people who put it into practice. He highlighted the reward by comparing it to two items of clothing that signified victory and honor in his day. Do you recall what those were? Well, in verse 9, he said they would be a garland of favor on your head and pendants around your neck. So the garland and the pendant would be those two items referred to in that passage. The next piece of wisdom Solomon gave to his son was to resist sin. That gets us to our third focal passage that reads like this: "My son, if sinners entice you, don't be persuaded. If they say, 'Come with us, let's set an ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some innocent person just for fun. Let's swallow them alive like Sheol, whole, like those who go down to the pit. We'll find all kind of valuable property and fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot with us, and we'll all share the loot.'" I think Solomon knew that the enticement and temptation could be hard to reject, especially for a young person. As you know, sinful temptation draw us, allure us, and entice us to go off the path God has set for us in His Word. It is not a matter of if, but a matter of when. It is the wise person who runs from temptation. Now, verse 11 addresses peer pressure of evil people who attack and abuse the innocent just for fun. Such evil and twisted behavior becomes a way of life for the ungodly and the unwise person. Sidebar here on peer pressure: as you know, there is a lot of that in our society, particularly on our young people, even for adults. So anything we can do to help with that certainly is beneficial. Solomon called his son to resist and flee from such temptation. And then the next section, he points to the consequences for following the wrong crowd. Let's take a look at this fourth focal passage. It reads, "My son, don't travel the road with them or set foot on their path, because their feet run toward evil and they hurry to shed blood. It is useless to spread a net where any bird can see it. But they set an ambush to kill themselves. They attack their own lives. Such are the paths of all who make profit dishonestly. It takes the lives of those who receive it." These verses express deep emotion to me. Solomon's warnings were not angry prohibitions. They came from the heart of a loving father pleading with his son to stay true to God. Solomon knew the unwise person ended up on a path of self-destruction. Notice the images that Solomon used to convey his message. The godless person is like a bird that cannot see the trap set by his own sin, even though it is in plain sight. In the end, the ungodly wind up destroying their own lives. Tragically, such a person is blind to what is happening. Godly wisdom removes the blinders and helps us to see the connection between unwise choices and consequences. So if we were to take a look at a summary of today's lesson, we would see that the book of Proverbs begins with an invitation and a warning. Solomon urged anyone who would listen to hear and obey the call to walk in the path of God's wisdom. There was a warning as well. Solomon warned of trouble that awaits anyone who does not heed the call to live wisely. He then turned his attention to his son. His son would need to make up his mind to walk in God's wisdom, and Solomon offered him an explanation as to why. Both of these great admonitions, the call to hear the wisdom of God and the warning of what will happen when true wisdom is rejected, are summed up in one of Solomon's most famous sayings. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. So, in conclusion, we know this: true wisdom starts with a right relationship with God. Obedience to godly counsel leads to favor in life. Ignoring godly wisdom leads to self-destruction. So I want to leave you with this question: in what areas do we need to be more obedient to God's Word? Thanks for listening. Next Sunday's lesson is entitled Direction Offered. In that lesson, God provides direction to those who will place their trust in Him. I hope you will join us if time permits.